So our study of the polynomial method continues. Today we are going to do the Zemuredi-Trotter theorem. So we have a bunch of points, finite number of points, and a finite number of lines all on the two-dimensional plane. Okay. On the plane, let P be a set of m points, and L be, say, a set of n lines. An incidence is a line passing through a point. That's called an incidence. A line in L passing through a point in P. The question we are asking is how many incidences can be there. So it's like a bipartite graph. You line up all the points on one side, lines on one side, put an edge between a point and a line if that line passes through that point. So obviously in all there are m into n such possible intersections. But the fact that everything is happening on the plane and these are lines and points forces a certain constraint. And what the theorem says is that you can't have more than m to the 2/3 times n to the 2/3 plus m plus n incidences. You can't have more than this. So notice that this is substantially smaller than m into n. And you need to put m and n separately because one of the two of m and n, m or n, could be very small, and you can always have n lines going through one point or all m points lying on one line. So you know that m and n are lower bounds, trivial lower bounds. Right? So you need to have at least m or n. Okay, there. So in particular, if m equals n, the total number, then you can write it more simply as order n to the 4/3 for m equal to n, or when m and n differ by only a constant factor. So this is what we want to prove. Apparently there is a construction which achieves omega of this number. So up to a constant factor this is tight. I don't know that construction, so we're not going to discuss it. The paper that I read, what I'm presenting today is a little paper by Chiri Matuzek. He's a person who works in discrete geometry. And this is a theorem that was proved several years ago using purely combinatorial methods. So a couple of years ago there was a breakthrough in discrete geometry by two people called Guth and Cards. And they solved a problem called the Erdős distances problem. Given n points on the plane, what is the maximum number of distinct distances that must be there between n points in the plane? Given any n points in the plane, n distinct points, how many distinct distances can come up there is a question that Erdős was interested in. And he conjectured that, so Erdős conjectured long ago, Erdős distances problem. He conjectured that you give n points on the plane, they should be omega n to the 1 minus small o of 1 distances. Whatever be the endpoints. And this was a long-standing open problem, and these people proved that there must be n to the, n by log n distances for any endpoints on the plane. Just in 2009, I think. And that was a major breakthrough, and they used the polynomial method to solve it. And since then, lots of problems in discrete geometry, people are trying to either rediscover new easy proofs for hard older proofs using the polynomial method. And Matuzek is one of the people who's carrying out that kind of program. And the particular proof that we're going to discuss today is a proof by Matuzek for the Zemredy-Trotter theorem. And it's nice to include it in our little course because it's very different from the kind of applications that we've already seen. It brings in new ideas. Okay, so the first of the new ideas that it uses is something called the Borsuk-Ulam theorem. Okay, the two main ingredients, let me just write it down in the corner here. The two main ingredients in this new proof of the Zemredy-Trotter theorem are, first is what is called the polynomial ham sandwich theorem. And the second is a technique of partitioning point sets with polynomials. So these are the two main ingredients. The second ingredient is something that comes from the Guthkard's paper. They are the first ones to use a construction of polynomials to partition point sets. So this is an idea from that, and the polynomial ham sandwich theorem is something that is well known in discrete geometry. So let's understand both of those and then put them together to give a proof of the theorem. So first, it's nice to the Borsuk-Ulam theorem is used to prove the polynomial ham sandwich theorem. So let's understand the Borsuk-Ulam theorem. SD is the unit sphere, the surface of the unit sphere in d plus 1 dimensions. So what is the sphere in 3 dimensions? The surface of the sphere in 3 dimensions is S2. Okay. S1 is the circle, unit circle, and on the plane. So suppose F is a map from SD to RD is any continuous map. Continuous function. Continuity we understand, right? So continuity on SD means that when 2 points on the surface of the sphere SD get very close to each other, the images must also get close to each other. The notion of closeness is the intuitive notion of closeness, the standard topology. So when 2 points tend to each other, their F images will also tend to each other, the epsilon delta kind of definition that you understand by continuity. So suppose F is a continuous function from sphere SD to the d-dimensional Euclidean space. The claim is that when there exists a point x in SD such that fx is f of minus x. Minus x is the antipodal point. You take the sphere, you take any point on the sphere, draw the diameter through the center, it will hit the sphere on the other side. That is the point minus x. All the coordinates will get negated, right? So what it says is that there must be a pair of antipodal points where the function takes the same value. Okay, what is the intuition for this? The intuition for this is the following simple thing. You take a balloon in 3 dimensions, so that's a 2-dimensional, that is S2. Take a balloon in 3 dimensions. Now, where is S2 going to be mapped to? R2, that is the plane. So what it says is, crush the balloon, crumple it up in any way you like and put it on the plane, flat on the plane. There must be 2 points on the flattened balloon which are actually 2 diametrically opposite points on the sphere. Any way you crush it, a crushing is a kind of continuous deformation. It's a continuous map. You take the balloon and crush it like this, intuitively you can see that if you, in the 2 ends where you hold it, those 2 things must come and touch each other. And this happens even after you crumple it up, do whatever you like, so long as it's a continuous deformation. There will always be 2 points, one on top of each other in the crushed balloon, which are diametrically opposite points. And this carries over to any dimension. Okay, this is a very important theorem in discrete geometry. There is a book that Matuzek has written called Using the Borzo-Coulomb Theorem, and it's full of applications, many applications it has. And one particular application is the so-called ham sandwich theorem. And the polynomial ham sandwich theorem is just one step away from the ham sandwich theorem. Ham sandwich theorem says the following. Suppose A1, A2, AD are, I'm going to formulate it in a very simple way first. Let's first understand the simple formulation and then I'll just tell you what the general thing is. Are, say, convex bodies in d-dimensional space. Okay, so A1 could be a loaf of bread, A2 could be a chunk of cheese, and so on. Something is also a chunk of ham, etc., etc. Okay, in d dimensions, I don't know what it means. So in 3 dimensions, A1, A2, A3 are like that. What it says is that then there is a hyperplane H in RD that bisects all of A1 to AD. Okay, so there is a discrete version of it, and that's what we need. Let me just state the discrete version also here. The discrete version of the ham sandwich theorem is that A1, A2, AD are finite point sets. Finite sets in R per D. Then there is a hyperplane H in RD that bisects them all. Of course, when we say bisects, it should be clear what we mean by bisects. So in the finite case, what we mean by bisects is you take the positive side of the hyperplane, intersect it with AI, the cardinality of that, the number of points. What is the positive side of the hyperplane? The hyperplane is defined by linear equation. Sigma AI xi equals B. Positive side is when sigma AI xi is strictly greater than B. Negative side is when it's strictly less than B. So the positive side of the hyperplane H intersection AI should be at most cardinality AI by 2, floor of that, as well as the negative side. So there could be some points of the set AI that lie on the hyperplane. What you demand is that on either side you have at most half the points, either side of the hyperplane. Both sides need not be equal. That's right, because it depends on, exactly. In particular, if there are an odd number of points, then one of the points must lie on the hyperplane, because both sides have to be at most half. It turns out that the continuous case is easier to prove than the finite case. What is the continuous case, the meaning of the continuous case? I mean, how do you define bisection here? It's the volume of the intersection of the positive side with AI. Okay, what we want to say is the measure. So you could have a different measure for each of the convex bodies. You can define a different measure. I'm being a little vague here. Measure could be just volume if you're talking about the standard Lebesgue measure. But you could define a more complex measure. Anything that is well behaved. So the measure of H plus intersection AI should be half the measure of AI. Because what lies on H plus is going to be zero dimension. I mean, for all nice measures, it's going to be something that you can ignore. So this is what bisect means. The measures of what lies on either side of the hyperplane is half the measure. So in terms of convex bodies, you can think of it as volume. It gets the name ham sandwich theorem because what it's saying is that you take a chunk of bread, place a chunk of ham on it, place a chunk of cheese on it. There's always a plane which can cut all three of them, which will divide it into two equal sandwiches. So let's see the easy proof of it. It's nice because you can see that the Borzoi-Coulomb theorem can be applied in surprising ways. So I'll show you the proof of the continuous version and hand wave to convince you that it will actually imply the discrete version. So I want to apply the Borzoi-Coulomb theorem. So I want to define a continuous map from SD to RD where D is the same D there, and use the fact that there are a pair of antipodal points where the function value is the same. Okay, the value of the function is a D tuple, remember, in real numbers. So suppose U0, U1, UD is on SD. Remember, SD is actually contained in RD plus 1. It lives in D plus 1 dimensions. So it's a D plus 1 tuple. And so given a point like this, I'm going to define a hyperplane. Let's call this point U bar. Let's define the hyperplane H of U bar is just, or I'm going to define the positive side of the hyperplane. It's all the points x bar and r to the d such that u1 x1 etc. ud xt is greater than u0. Okay. So this defines a hyperplane in all cases except when all the ui's are 0. When all the ui's are 0, what is h plus of u bar? So let me write down h minus as well. H minus of u bar is all the points such that this sum is less than u0. So in all cases except the case when u1 to ud is the all zeros vector, this defines the two sides of a hyperplane. When all the ui's are 0, what happens? If u0 is negative or 0, then this side will be everything and this will be the empty side. When u0 is positive, this will be everything and this will be the empty side. Correct? So in either case, it's, so in the case of all zeros, it's the entire space is one of the halves and the other one is empty, vice versa. In every other case, it's like a proper hyperplane which will slice up RD into two halves into two space. Now what we're going to do is to just define f as follows. F of u bar is defined as, it's going to be a D tuple, which is just the measure of these things. Mu1 of H plus u bar intersect A1, mu2 of H plus u bar intersect A2, mu d of H plus u bar intersect. So what is f of u bar? It's a D tuple consisting of the volume of A1 on the positive side of the hyperplane H, followed by volume of A2 on the positive side, etc. Okay. If mu1 to mu d are all nice measures, f is a continuous map, because each of the mu i's continuously change as you change things. Just believe that f is a continuous map. The mu i's are nice. In particular for volumes, it's clearly going to be a continuous map. So there exists a u bar such that f of u bar is f of minus u bar. But what is h plus of minus u bar? H plus of minus u bar is just h minus of u bar. Okay. It's because all the inequalities will get reversed. And so when you say f of u bar is f of minus u bar, what happens exactly? Means that particular hyperplane H is going to halve each of the bodies A1 to AD. Okay. So that is the hyperplane that will achieve the ham sandwich. Now if you come to point sets, the measure actually is just counting the number of points, and that is not a continuous function. But what we can do is we can think of a mu1 that is going to place a lot of mass on the points in the set A1, and it tapers off like some kind of Gaussian function as you go away from that point. Make it continuous, but put a lot of mass on those points. And for each of such measures, the continuous ham sandwich theorem is going to work. And in a limiting sense, where you put your, in the limit you're putting more and more mass on those discrete points and very little outside, it will imply the discrete version. That is hand waved, but just take it. You can formalize it and prove it properly. So we won't go into those details, because it will eat up too much time and it's not going to give us more insight. Okay, so that is the ham sandwich theorem and the corresponding discrete version. Fine, so let's see what is the polynomial ham sandwich theorem, and understand that. I'm going to define it only in 2 dimensions. I leave it to you as an exercise to generalize it to d dimensions. So this is the polynomial ham sandwich theorem. Take many finite point sets on the plane. The ham sandwich theorem is not going to directly work here because there are too many of them. You can't hope to cut all of them. For instance, if you give 3 point sets on the plane, you can't bisect all of them with a line. You can always find 3 point sets. You can't bisect with a line. So there are too many of them. The claim is that if D is such that D plus 2 choose 2 minus 1 is at least T, then there is a degree D polynomial fxy. We're working in 2 dimensions. There's a degree D polynomial fxy such that f bisects all of A1. Okay, what does bisect mean here? Just as we talked of H plus and H minus, can talk of F plus and F minus. F plus consists of F plus is all points AB and R2, such that FAB is greater than 0, and F minus is all points on the plane where the function value is less than 0. And when you say it bisects, exactly in this sense, F plus intersect AI has cardinality at most half, F minus intersect AI has cardinality at most half. And this is easy to prove. The moment I write down so we're going to prove it using the hyperplane version, the discrete version which is right there. Okay, what does d plus 2 choose to? For bivariate polynomials, it's something that we have seen before. D plus n choose n was the total number of monomials in n variables of degree at most n. So d plus 2 choose 2 is total number of monomials, number of x power I, y power j, such that I plus j is at most d. Right? We are not interested in the constant term, and that's why we are looking at d plus 2 choose 2 minus 1. This is this number such that 1 less than equal to I plus j less than equal to d. Leave out I and j equal to 0. This is the number. Now define the following function phi from Rd to R d plus 2 choose 2 minus 1. Oh, there's no R2 2. D is now the degree and not the dimension. I got confused. Okay. 2 is the dimension. What does it do? It takes a point alpha beta. Oops. So phi is going to map the point alpha beta to a tuple which is just the values of all these monomials. So you are basically linearizing that polynomial. So the first thing is just going to be alpha, then beta, then alpha, beta, etc. At some point of time you will have alpha to the I, beta to the j, and what will you have in the end? Beta to the d. Phi is an injective map. One. Why is it injective? Obviously, because the input itself is part of the thing. So if two things are different, obviously the images, you have more information, they are also going to be different. So phi is clearly injective. So I am looking at this, I am interested in the sets phi of A1, etc., phi of AD, which are the images of the D or AT, sorry, images of the T sets that are given to me. A1 to AT are T subsets of R2. Apply phi to each of them. What is the cardinality of phi A1? It's the same as the cardinality of A1 because phi is injective. Since it's injective, it will preserve the cardinalities. Every point has a unique image there. Now that I've come into this space, what should I do? Apply the hyperplane Ham sandwich theorem. So I have got T sets in here. I'm going to use the fact that T is at most d plus 2 choose 2 minus 1 So the dimension of the space is at least t. Therefore, the Ham-Sandwich theorem is applicable, right? I don't need these sets. Even if I just need to cut cheese and bread, also I'll be able to cut it in half. So applying the so let's erase this, the discrete version of the Ham-Sandwich theorem. By the discrete version, of the Ham-Sandwich theorem. There exists H n R d plus 2 choose 2 minus 1 such that H bisects each of phi of A1 etc. phi of AT. All these T sets are bisected by H. So H is a hyperplane in d plus 2 choose 2 minus 1 dimensions. Let's give a name to that let's write down the, so H, not give a name to it, H is the name. Give names to all the coefficients of that hyperplane. Say A00 is the constant term in it plus summation Aij. Let's use the variable Zij for these coordinates. So what is the coordinate Zij corresponding to? It is the corresponding coordinate in this tuple here, right? For each of the coordinates in the tuple, you need a new variable because it's the dimension of the space is that. So you have these Zij's, as many new variables as required. Now what is phi of alpha beta? That's not what I want to ask. I just want to define my polynomial f, then we'll see. So how should we define the polynomial? Just substitute x power I y power j for Zij. That's going to define our polynomial. So define f like this. Isn't it obvious that f must bisect A1, A2, AD? Because when you take alpha and beta and substitute it into f, it is equivalent to taking h and looking at the sign of this point. Okay, so for every point in AI, the corresponding point in phi of AI is going to be either above the hyperplane or below the hyperplane. That's the same thing as saying it's f is greater than 0 or less than 0, and it will happen for at most 50% of the points for each of A1, A2, AT. So clearly, and saying anything more is a waste. Clearly, f bisects A1 to AT. So that's the polynomial Ham-Sandwich theorem. Fine. So we are done with understanding the polynomial Ham-Sandwich theorem. We are going to use it to partition point sets using polynomials. So let me leave the statement of the Ham-Sandwich theorem here. I'll erase the proof. Is it clear? Is it fine with everyone? The argument? Try it. Yeah, it will. Same thing. Only thing is you need to choose the degree appropriately large. It's the bound and the degree that is going to change. It's going to become really large degree. So here notice that if you have T sets, the degree should be something like order square root of T, because D plus 2 choose 2 is like D square, order D square. So D should be like order square root of T in 2 dimensions. Oh, so the degree will not be enormous, it's actually going to be much lower. So what you will need is D plus n choose n, but n is also involved in it, so it depends on that. D plus n choose n is at least T. So whatever comes out of that, that's probably going to involve n on the other side as well. Maybe it will be like T to the power 1 by n times n or something. No, just n, because you will take the nth root as well, so it will just be n. Yeah, you can just try it out and see how it works. Now the notion of partitioning. So we suppose P is set of m points in R2. Okay, before that I want to say, so let's say A and B are 2 finite point sets in R2, and F is a polynomial. So here's the definition. You say that F strictly separates A and B if, remember, ZF stands for the 0 set of F. It's a notation that I introduced last time and we did the, so ZF is all points AB in R2 such that FAB is 0, the 0 set of F. So I say that F strictly separates A and B if A and B have 0 intersection, empty intersection with the 0 set, and if point P belongs to A and Q belongs to B, the line segment PQ intersects the 0 set of F. Okay, the line segment intersects the 0 set of F. Now what I want to do is, starting with the set of m points that is given to me, I'm going to decompose it into chunks. So using a polynomial, I want to construct a polynomial which will break it up into many chunks such that any two of them is strictly separated by this polynomial. Okay, so given P contained in R2, cardinality of P is m, say that an S partitioning polynomial fxy is such that P minus ZF is partitioned into sets P1, P2, Pt, I'm not interested in the points which are zeros of f. Points which are not zeros of f should be partitioned into P1, P2, Pt such that cardinality Pi should be at most m by s. Okay, that's why it's called an S partitioning polynomial. And any pair Pi Pj is strictly separated by f. So again, P is a finite point set. I am looking for a polynomial such that if I take all the points which are not lying on that polynomial on the curve, those are the 0 points. All the other points I can break it up into chunks roughly of 1 by cardinality s fraction of the original set, should all be bounded by m by cardinality m by s, such that f strictly separates any two of them. It's not the same thing as saying that there's nothing like one side of this polynomial. It's not the same thing as saying sets lie on either the positive or the negative side. It's the same polynomial. So for instance, a polynomial can have many sides to it, so to speak. I mean, it can partition the plane into many chunks. Take two lines on the plane. That's a product of two linear functions. Two intersecting lines will break up the plane into 4 regions, right? So a polynomial which has many factors, it has like many branches to it, and they together will break up the plane into many chunks. So we are not talking about the sign of the polynomial at all here when we are talking of this notion of strict separation. What we are saying is that you take any two distinct chunks here, Pi and Pj, take a point in Pi, take a point in Pj. If you draw a line, the line segment between those two must cut the curve somewhere, so must pass through a 0. And here is the theorem that we are going to prove using the polynomial ham sandwich theorem, and that would be the second step, second ingredient that is required. Once we have that, we can prove the Zemrety-Trotter theorem. Theorem is for any P contained in R2 of size m, the size is not important. There is an S partitioning polynomial f of degree order square root of s. So the only parameter that governs the degree is the sizes of the chunks that I want to finally get. If I want 1 by s fraction of the chunks, then the degree is going to be square root of s. And the proof is by a repeated application of the polynomial ham sandwich theorem. So what we're going to do is, you start with, we're going to initially, your collection of point sets is just one. P is a single point set. Starting with this, I'm going to define P1, P2, etc. At some stage I'll stop Pk, and Pk will give me the partition. So P1 is going to be a collection of at most 2 subsets. of P. P2 will be a collection of at most 4 subsets and so on. Pk will be a collection of at most 2 power k subsets. So starting with P0, we are just going to apply the ham sandwich theorem. So I have a single point set P to begin with. What will I do? What does the ham sandwich theorem tell me? There is a polynomial of a certain degree. T is 1 here, so the degree is going to be something. It's just going to be a hyperplane in this case, which is going to break up P0 into 2 sets. Okay. So I start with P, and suppose I manage to construct up to Pj. Okay. Suppose I have Pj. What is Pj? It has at most 2 power j sets, 2 power j disjoint subsets of P. At the jth stage, I have 2 power j disjoint subsets of. How did I get to Pj? I started with P0 as P, picked a polynomial given by the ham sandwich theorem. To begin with, it was a linear function, used that. The next time I'll have 2 sets, I'll choose a slightly larger degree polynomial which will slice both of them and keep doing it. I've come up to the stage Pj. What do I do at the stage Pj? Well, I have something like 2 power j sets. I need to choose a polynomial whose degree is like order square root of 2 power j and slice all the sets in this into roughly equal halves. Before that, in Pj, what is the size of each set? Disjoint subsets of P of sizes at most m by 2 power j, because at every stage we are halving the sets, no? Applying the ham sandwich theorem. At every stage we are halving the sets, and the next stage of halving is the same thing. Pick a polynomial of appropriate degree, you will be able to cut all of them into half. Okay, that's easy. When do we stop the process? So stop at k equals, say, ceil of log s to base 2. So that cardinality of every set that is left. So what do we get? In Pk, we get a collection, let's call them P1, P2, Pt of sets, such that T is at most 2 power k. So why am I writing at most 2 power k? In the process of halving, we are dealing with finite sets. Some set may become empty. Empty sets don't count. I'll throw them away. T is at most 2k, and 2k is at most 2 times s. So let's keep these parameters because it's ceil of log s to base 2. It's at most 2s, such that cardinality Pi is at most m by s. That's also true by the choice of k. Fine. Now, what is the S partitioning polynomial? Just take the product of all the polynomials that you used up to this point. So let's say for going from P to P1, we use the polynomial f1, which is a linear function. P1 to P2, use the polynomial f2, and so on. So let's take f to be f1, f2, fk. I claim that so f is an S partitioning polynomial, is S partitioning. Before we see that, let's check the degree. What is the degree of f? It's the sum of the degrees of fi or fj, let us call them. What is the degree of fj? Order square root of 2 power j. order square root of 2 power j. At every stage, if you have so many sets, square root of that is the degree that. Adding up from j equals 1 to k, this is order square root of 2 power k. That's order root s. So degree is fine. Why is it S partitioning? You take any two sets Pi and Pj here. Take a point P in Pi and a point Q in Pj. In the beginning they were together in the set P. The first time that they get separated, they are on opposite sides of that particular function f, and the line segment is going to hit the 0 set of that function. But the 0 set of f is the union of 0 sets of f1, f2, fk. So the line segment is going to hit the 0 set of f as well.
Do we need all the products?
No, that's not clear. Yeah, okay. That's a question that I don't know the answer to. I know that P and Q get separated in the sense of positive and negative side by a certain polynomial at a certain stage. And at that stage, I know geometrically that that line segment must go through the curve. Okay? And therefore, that line segment intersects the 0 set of that polynomial at the stage when it gets separated. Because the 0 set of f is the union of the 0 sets of the fi's, whenever you have a product of polynomials, the 0 set is the union of 0 sets. It will intersect the 0 set of that. That's the reason. So now we have everything that we need to prove the theorem. So let's write down the Zemredy-Trotter theorem statement again. P is an m-point set and L is an n-line set in R2. IPL is P comma L, P in P, L in L, such that P lies on L. So this is the set of incidences, and what we have to prove is that the cardinality of the set is order m to the 2/3 n to the 2/3 plus m plus n. For simplicity, I am going to look at the case when m equals n. So when m equals n, we need to prove this number is to the 4/3. And I'll leave it to you as an exercise to work out the general case, just so that we need to work with fewer parameters. Okay. I need two simple facts about other facts about polynomials, things that we have already seen. One fact is suppose f x y in R x y is degree d and L is any line. Take any line on the plane, any polynomial, degree d polynomial, bivariate polynomial. Either L is contained in the 0 set That will happen if f has a factor, a linear factor, which is the equation of L. So either L is contained in the 0 set, or the cardinality of L intersection the 0 set is bounded by, along the line the polynomial f is a univariate polynomial. Along the line, if you think of the point that runs on the line parameterized by some t, we know that, no? There is a starting point plus the direction multiplied by the parameter. That gives you the line. In that parameter, it's a univariate variable. A non-zero univariate polynomial has degree at most d. So this is one fact that we need. Another fact that we need is if f in Rxy has degree d, then ZF contains at most d distinct lines. How many lines can the 0 set of a degree d polynomial contain? At most d distinct lines. Intuitively, the reason is that it can't have more than d linear factors, because otherwise it will violate the degree constraint. But a geometric way of seeing it is, f is a non-zero polynomial of degree d, so there is a point on which f doesn't vanish. Why is that true? F is a degree d, it's a non-zero polynomial. Okay, I was hoping you will say Schwarzschild or something like that, but because non-zero polynomials can take zero values everywhere in the finite field setting, you know that, no? Can you think of a non-zero polynomial that will be zero everywhere in the finite field case? If we take the polynomial x to the p minus x over a finite field of prime size, of the same size as, of size p, by Fermat's little theorem we know that it will be zero everywhere. It's a non-zero polynomial. But here that's not a problem. So there is a point on which it doesn't vanish. Let's say f at the point AB is not 0. AB is some point on the plane. Now take a line through that point. That line is not fully contained in the 0 set. Okay. Fine. Now before that, so let's say that L1, L2, Lk are all contained in the 0 set of f. L1, L2, Lk are k lines contained in the 0 set of f. What do I want to prove? That k has to be at most d. Okay. So I want to prove this without using factorization. So these k lines which are contained in f, 0 set of f, I want to prove k is at most d. So choose this point P which is not in the 0 set because f doesn't vanish there. Choose a line, I can always choose a line through the point P, L not parallel to L1 to Lk. I can always choose because there are infinitely many slopes I can choose. L is not parallel to L1 to Lk. I also need to choose L such that L does not pass through Li intersection Lj. Li intersection Lj, if they are not parallel lines, will have one point of intersection. I don't want to go through those points. Again, I have to avoid only finitely many directions to do that. So I can always choose an L like this. How many points does L intersect these things in? In k distinct points. L intersects L. It's not parallel to L1, so it must intersect L1. It doesn't go through common intersections, so it will intersect all of them in distinct places. So there are k distinct points in which L is intersecting them. All of them are in the 0 set of f, but L is not contained in it. So the number of zeros has to be bounded by t. which is in the common intersection. So K is bounded by D. I need so these two little facts to prove this here. Okay, so back to the proof. So now we are ready to prove the Szemery-Trotter theorem. So you're going to take the point set P and partition it. So set S to be n to the 2/3. There is an order, there is an R, degree R, S partitioning polynomial. Let's call it F, where what is R? R is order n to the 1/3, because it's square root of S, order square root of S. So let's say the partitions are P1, P2, Pt. Be the partition. What I know is cardinality Pi is bounded by m is equal to n. Okay, so n by S, which is n to the 1/3 for all I, and T is bounded by twice S, 2 times n to the 2/3. Okay, so among these points, don't cover the points that lie on the 0 set. So let's say R is, so this is a partition of P minus the 0 set, right? Because the points on the 0 set are not covered. Let's say R is P intersection the 0 set. Again, among the lines, we know that some of the lines could be contained inside the inside the 0 set. So let L0 contained in L be contained in the 0 set. So the points in R are all zeros of the polynomial f, and these lines are all contained in the 0 set of f. Now I want to partition IP L like this. So this is just the set of incidences between Pi and L, I going from 1 to T, plus incidences between R and L. But incidences between R and L, I'll break up like this: R and L0 plus incidence, put cardinalities everywhere, or put unions if you like. R and L minus L0. It's fine, no? Any line point incidence is between a line set and some point in one of the PIs, or it is between the line set and some point in R. And that itself, let me break up like this, this and this. So let's first bound these two quantities, and then we'll worry about the third quantity. So we're going to put a simple bound on cardinality of I R L0. R is bounded by n in any case. What is L0 bounded by? How many distinct lines can be at D? And what is D is the degree. Degree is R. Right? So this is bounded by n times R. R is order n to the 1/3, so this is order n to the 4/3. This is a crude bound. I R L0 is bounded by cardinality R into cardinality L0, bipartite, complete bipartite graph. What about this? I R L minus L0. So these are lines that are not contained inside the zero set. Each such line can intersect by fact 1, intersect the zero set in at most degree many points. Okay. How many lines are there in all? At most n lines are there in all. N lines are there in all. Each such line can intersect in at most degree many points, which is R many points. So this is also order n to the 4/3. So the last two terms are bounded by what we want. So we need to only worry about the summation part. Okay. So let Li denote lines that contain at least one point of Pi. Li be the set of lines that contain at least one point of Pi. Notice that I am not saying the Li's form a partition of L or anything, because the same line could be hitting points in P1, P2, etc. But how many sets can it intersect? Suppose L belongs to Li, how many Pi's can L intersect? How many Pj's can L intersect? I have this partition P1 to Pt. L is one of the lines. It's going through Pi. It's taking some point in Pi. How many things can it intersect? At most? At most R plus 1, because a line that is passing, when it goes from the next region, suppose from Pi it goes to Pj, it's going to hit a 0 of f. From Pj, when it goes to some Pj prime, it's going to pick up another 0 of f. Every line segment, if you take a point in Pi, that is the crucial property of S partitioning polynomials, right? If you take a point in Pi and a point in Pj, the line segment that joins those 2 points must contain a 0 of f. So here is this line, if it is hitting many Pi's, for every adjacent Pi that it goes through, it is going to pick up a 0, a distinct 0 of f, as you travel along that point, the line. So you know that a line that, this line is not contained in the 0 set. Why? Because this line is picking up a point of Pi and Pi is not contained in the 0 set. P1 to Pt are all distinct from the 0 set. A line that is not contained in the 0 set can intersect the 0 set in at most degree many points. We are again using that. So it can intersect the 0 set in at most degree many points, and by the S partitioning property, therefore, it can intersect at most R plus 1 of these, because the degree is R. Okay. So that number is less than or equal to R plus 1. So it's at most R plus 1. because r plus 1 will give me r 0 points, and I can't have more than that. Okay, so that gives me something interesting. I can bound sigma cardinality Li using that. Okay, now it's some kind of combinatorics that we need to carefully find our way through. We can bound this. Well, it's simple. Think of a bipartite graph with the lines on one side and the pi's on the other side. Okay, P1 to Pt on this side and the lines on the other side. Each line in Li is incident on at most r plus 1 of the pi's. Okay, so take a line. So here I have all the lines. So this is the set L. So I have small L1 to so many of them, L whatever, Ln of them, and I'm looking at the lines in capital Li, let's say. So take a particular line here. It's incident on at most r plus 1 of the capital Pi's, and that's true for it. It's independent of I. It's true for any line here. Any line belongs to some Pi. A line that doesn't intersect any of those points, forget it. We already accounted for it. It has no incidences left. So it's going to be incident on at most r plus 1 of these. A point here, how many lines can go through it? So a line here can go through at most r plus 1 of these. So what about the other direction? How many lines? The lines incident on Pi could be I want to bound the sum of the sizes of the LIs.
So that is nothing but size of each Li is degree of Pi.
Size of each Li is not degree of Pi. What do you mean? Why is it degree of Pi? Because different Pi's could a line in Li is
Li is defined as lines that contain at least one point from Pi.
yeah.
So if we take Li, it is now what we are doing is we are mapping line L to Pi if it passes through at least one point in Pi.
Yeah.
So size of Li is degree of Pi.
Degree of Pi.
Yes.
See, Pi can have many different sets which lines from many different LIs going through Pi.
Yeah.
So I want to
At most n to the 1 by 3 points.
sorry.
Each Pi has at most n to the 1 by 3.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe like r into n to the 1 by 3. R plus 1.
Each Pi is at most n to the 1 by 3 points. How many lines?
No,
The number of lines and that can go through a point can be up to n lines, right? There can be up to n lines that go through the point. So n lines, and so the degree on this side can be as large as n into t. The degree on this side can be as large as n into t. Every line intersecting a set P, a certain set, contributes to a degree in this graph. It can be as large as, but on this side what we know is that each line in Li,
can we say that it is equal to number of edges?
sorry?
Can we say it is equal to number of edges in the bipartite graph, sigma Li? Because
Yeah.
Li is nothing but, okay, look at all, take any Pi and see the set of lines, I mean set of points in that L set.
Yeah.
That is equal to Li. Isn't it? Because
Li is all those lines which have a common intersection with Pi.
yeah,
So for the degree of Pi is Li.
size of Li.
Degree of Pi is size of Li. So this is the sum of the degrees, and on this side, oh yeah, that's right. There are n lines, and we know that r plus 1 is the bound on the degree of every line. So r plus 1 into, that's absolutely right. So cardinality Li is just the degree of Pi, because Li is the set of lines which are incident on Pi. So cardinality Li is the degree of Pi, and on the other side every line is incident on at most r plus 1 of these Pi's. So okay, so this is, and now we are nearly done. Okay, so we are going to estimate sigma I Pi L. This number we have to estimate. Let's figure that out. Sigma I Pi L, I going from 1 to. So notice that we might as well write I Pi Li, because lines outside Li anyway don't have any incidence with Pi. So this is the quantity that we want to estimate. Okay. Now I want to partition Li into two parts. Li I want to write as Li prime union Li double prime. Li prime consists of lines in Li that are incident on exactly one, that hit exactly one point in Pi. This is lines which hit greater than or equal to 2 points. Right? Any line is going to either be incident on exactly 1 point or at least 2 points. So I Pi Li is really the union of these two, because Li partitions into those two sets. So let's consider, I am looking at this, sorry. Let's consider I going from 1 to t, the second thing, I Pi Li double prime. Take a line that is incident on 2 points in the point set. How many such lines can I have? For every point in the point set, I can have at most Pi minus 1 other, I mean, because any one of the other points I can draw a unique line going through it. I can have at most Pi minus 1 other things. So this is clearly bounded by summation I going from 1 to t, cardinality Pi square. Pi into Pi minus 1. For every Pi, can have at most Pi minus 1 points that are going through it. Okay, let's bound this. Here we can use the fact that it is n square by at most n square by s square, right? So this is bounded by t times n square by s square. T itself is bounded by 2s, 2 times n to the 2/3, actually it's 2s. So this entire thing looks like n square, order n square by s. Or put t equal to n to the 2/3 and s equal to n to the 2/3. You can see what's happening. And this is just order n to the 4/3. So the second term is bounded by the quantity that we want. Now let's look at the first term. First term is let's write it here because we are done with these two facts. So now we are interested in the second term, which is cardinality I pi comma Li prime, I going from 1 to t. Now here we are talking about lines that hit exactly one point. So what is the total number of incidences that are possible? At most cardinality Li incidences are possible, Li prime incidences are possible, because each line can pick up at most one, is going to pick up exactly one point. So this is summation I going from 1 to t, cardinality Li prime. Each line contributes one incidence. And this is bounded by what we have already bounded, cardinality Li, that degree argument, that's bounded by r plus 1 times n. And r is order n to the 1/3, so this is also order n to the 4/3. So we broke up this IPL into these different chunks and bounded each of them by order n to the 4/3. In the end, it does get a little hairy in detail, the last part. But the key idea is this S partitioning polynomial here, which I guess the crux of the argument is in the fact that if you look at lines that contain a point of pi, by the property of the S partitioning polynomial, it can hit at most r plus 1 of these sets in the partition, which is what gives us the theorem. That's it. So next time I'll see if I can do something algorithmic. We have spent a lot of time doing just combinatorial stuff. Something algorithmic next time.